I was born in Taiwan. I was born 40-something years ago in Taipei, Taiwan. I grew up there till I was about three years old, so I don't have that much of a memory of it back then. When I was 3 years old, I did move, my parents moved, I should say, to New York City, where they decided to attend Brooklyn College as, I think, a PhD student leading into a faculty role. I grew up in New York. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I wound up going through 6 to 12, 7 to 12, and how many people are you here from New York, out of curiosity? So Hunter High School in Manhattan, New York is really where I grew up. So I came out to California. I'm a transplant as well. I did take 1 year off from New York, and where my parents took me back to Taiwan. So I actually have 1 year that I spent from 8 to 9 years old, and I went to 3rd grade in this school called Jingxing Xiaoxue. And I understand that Steve Chen from YouTube actually went to this school, a little 10 years after me, but he actually went to this school as well. So I spent a year actually in Taipei, which was, a formative year for myself. My career, well, I went to Cornell for college, decided to go back to New York, and I worked at Oracle in New York from 90 to 96. And so this was a technical role at first in consulting, but then I moved into more of a sales role. And so you can see my career really was about enterprise software. So 6 years at Oracle, technical role, sales role. Went to Stanford. That's how I moved out here to California for my business school degree. Stayed at a company for a year at Crossworld Software, but really about a decade, about 9 years at Salesforce.com. Joined as a really early employee, interviewed in Mark's house in Telegraph Hill, since we didn't have offices yet. That's how early it was, pre-customer, pre-revenue, pre-product. And it was there till the company was about $1 billion. And then about 4.5 years ago, started this company, Zuora. So I went to Mark and said, hey, what am I going to do in 2008? One thing led to another. Mark was really supportive of me leaving Salesforce at the time and starting this company. He was one of my angel investors. We've been at it now for 4.5 years, have done 4 rounds, raised about $82 million from Benchmark, Greylock, Index Ventures, Redpoint, and we're doing really well, about 210 employees based in Redwood Shores. And that's a quick snapshot of who we are, who I am. So, and some personal brands. So throw up there, you can kind of recognize them. It's a little bit about what I like, and not a week goes by before someone gives me a lot of crap about still having a BlackBerry, but I am an addicted CrackBerry user, and it's been too hard to give up that keyboard. So, first lesson. If I were to kind of boil it up, and I'd say, in this job, you wind up interviewing a lot of people. Right, and I've probably interviewed, we have 200 employees, I've probably interviewed 1,000 people over the last 4 years, and probably another 1,000 people at Salesforce. And so you start to see patterns. You start to see patterns. And one of the biggest patterns that jumps out at me, when I was at Salesforce, I was about to hire this guy. I'm going to avoid to say which company he was from. And we had hired 2 or 3 people from that company before. And I say, hey, Mark, can I go hire this guy? And Mark goes, well, look, if you keep on hiring people from that company, we will become that company. And so I kind of went away and really thought about what that meant. And I've carried that with me. And what it really means is you are a product of your environment. You are a product of environment. We all know this. We will all be completely different people. If I grew up in Taiwan and my parents did not decide to come to here in the US, I would be a completely different person. Right? If I decided to stay in New York and not come to California, I would be a different person. If I decided to go into the finance industry or the consulting industry, I would be a different person. And we all kind of know that, but we underestimate the impact the environment has. And when I interview people, I see a lot of that. I see a lot of that where people gravitate towards a role more than they gravitate towards the company. And that is a big mistake, because the company, the environment that you pick is really what shapes you. And I remember talking to somebody who was coming out of Salesforce, and he was saying, hey, I've got 2 choices. I've got a choice of going to what looks like a rocket ship company, but they wanted me to be an individual contributor. Or I've got this other company that is giving me a chance to go build a team of 6 or 7 people and really run with that company. And I said, I'm not sure about this other choice. This company really gives you the environment that you need to learn from. And if you go here, you're not really going to have an environment that you can really learn. And lo and behold, 6 to 9 months later, the company was stalled out, and he was out looking for another job. I know that if I had picked a different company than Salesforce, I'm honest with myself, right? That I've had a good career, but if I picked a different company as Salesforce, if I didn't have a chance to ride a company from 0 to $1 billion and all the opportunities that come with being in that type of environment. And of course, we all think we're going to be successful, but you really need that environment to be successful and to give you the opportunities. And so really choosing the right environment is really, really important, right? Pick the right environment, pick the right organization, pick the right company, pick the right, pick the right set of friends, pick the right community that you want to be part of, because you are shaped by your environment. And I would say that, when I look at a person's success, 80% of that success I would attribute to them choosing the right environment that they were in and having, right, a platform to be successful and having a platform to grow. And 20% is really their own capabilities. Okay? And I think we all think differently. We all overestimate. We all think that 80% is our own capabilities and 20% is the environment. And I would actually argue that it is the other way around. And so, if you look at the contrast between you and your company and your environment really has the outsized effect. And I would just kind of throw that out there as a first lesson for all of us to think about. Lesson number 2 is this illusion of a fixed structure. Now, we all kind of grow up learning to follow rules. It's important for us to follow rules, for us to be together as a society. But as an artifact of that, we are all trained to take on artificial rules and artificial structures as reality, when they're not. They're simply just arbitrary structures that we have imposed ourselves in the society. All right? And I remember, I'll just share one more Mark story with you. I was with him in a meeting somewhere in San Francisco, and after the meeting, we're both headed to the office, and he said, well, why don't you jump in the car, I'll drive you to the office. So we drive to the office, and Mark then goes and proceeds and parks in an illegal spot. And I was like, Mark, this is an illegal spot. You can't really park here. And he says, well, don't worry about it. And we just proceed to walk upstairs. And then a day later, I'm in his assistant's office, and his assistant has all these parking tickets. He's got like 5 parking tickets. He's like trying to match parking tickets. And I realized that this guy would just park wherever the hell he wants. As long as it wasn't a tow zone, he wasn't really worried about it. Now part of it obviously was money. The guy's, he's not worried about a $40 ticket. He can pay that all day and all night. But it's the idea that I thought that I can't do that. I couldn't do that. I am governed by a set of rules where, I can't get myself to break that rule and go park in an illegal zone because it's a structure that I've been taught. And so what struck me was here's a guy that's able to take these constructs that we all live with and then make a decision as to whether he wants he's able to break these rules and break these constructs and construct alternative realities. And so what I encourage everybody to do as a second lesson is to try alternative frameworks and practice thinking about alternative frameworks for thinking about things. All right? And David, you talked about math. And I remember in freshman or sophomore year taking calculus. And I don't know how many people remember this thing, but there's actually alternative ways of thinking. You're taught in high school X, Y coordinates. And I remember once in math class, in calculus class, all of a sudden they sprung this whole different way of thinking about the world, right? It was a spherical coordinates or cylindrical coordinates. I don't know what it was, right? It wasn't X, Y, Z. It was like radius, sphere. And I was like, well, and if you use a different way of thinking about the world, then a whole bunch of things become easier, right? This calculus that you needed to do to calculate what the area or the volume under a circle looks like or a sphere winds up being a really, really simple formula by introducing a whole different way of thinking about the world. And so the idea of practicing different alternative ways of thinking about the world to basically break down the constructs that we all live with is a tool. It's a technique that I try to impart on my team to have breakthrough thinking. I'll give you one example, and this is an example up here. And I see this over and over again, that people get stuck in the organizational constructs that they live in, and they assume that this is a reality, and they actually make decisions based on this view of the world. But the organizational constructs are nothing more than artificial views of the world. And so what I encourage everybody to do is to take an organizational construct, so you see an org chart, and then flatten it. Flatten the org chart. Flatten the org chart so it looks like a big spider web. Okay, just flatten the whole thing, it looks like a big spider web. And then go to it, figure out where you are on the spider web. And then go build some alternative lines that weren't quite visible in the org structure. right? Build some alternative lines to other parts of the organization because there's a whole bunch of people that you're tied to beyond the people that you personally report to and the persons that report to you. And then take that org chart, take where you are, and then lift that part of the org chart up, right? Lift that part of the org chart up. So if you're in one of these nodes on the side, flatten the org chart, find where you are, draw the line, take that node where you are and pick it up so that you're on the top of the org chart, right? That you're on the top of the org chart. And this gives you a completely different way of thinking about your organization, right? A completely different way about your organization where your manager works for you, where your people work for you, where other parts of the organization that you are dependent on to be successful work for you. And you've got to go figure out how to make your connection with them really successful. And then you'll find that you might be having more meetings. You might be having more meetings with other people in other parts of the organization on a regular basis because their success, your success is tied to their success. And you might have a whole different way of thinking about how to approach your manager, right? You might approach them with tasks. You might approach them with specific asks versus going to your manager and saying, well, what do you want me to do now? Right? It's a completely different way of thinking about the org chart. And I'll tell you, a lot of times when people have frustrations with the organization, this is the root cause, which they're bound by, they're constrained by traditional ways of thinking about an organization. And if we go through this exercise and give them a whole different way of thinking about the company, they're able to break through and actually be a lot more effective and successful in their organizations. And so, reinventing the org chart in 3 easy steps. Flatten it, draw new lines that weren't really, really obvious, and put yourself at the top. It's a whole different way of thinking about your organization. There's no right or wrong, they're both valid, but it's a different way of thinking about it. And so, really choosing your environment because that gives you the platform for personal growth. Breaking frameworks, right, and understanding that how we think about our world, our structures are all artificial, they're all arbitrary, and there are alternative ways of thinking about these things and practice looking at things from different perspectives. The third one is what I'll call practice N-1 thinking. And you see this all the time. You see this all the time where people are typically anchored on where they are. They're anchored on where they are. It makes sense, right? This is where I am today, and this is the next step I'm going to take. Right? I'm here in San Francisco, and I'm going to drive, and I'm going to go to 101. Right? This is where I am today, and this is the next step that I need to do. When I wake up in the morning and I construct my to-do list, it's all anchored by where I am today. And I had a fortune of working with a gentleman, Scott Thompson, who's the president of PayPal. He had joined us, our board, 4 years ago, and did his stint at Yahoo. But he gave me this lesson. He said, I go all around the world. PayPal's a big company. And he gave me an example. I'll have to drop into the head of Brazil as an example. He must have just come back from Brazil. And he says, I see this guy really once a year, right? I spend quality time with him once a year, maybe twice a year when I fly out there or he flies to the exec meeting. And so what impact can I have in a 2-3 hour meeting with this person? And he says, what I try to do is I try to anchor them on where they need to be. So you're a $30 million business now in Brazil, and in 4 years, you need to be a $300 million business. So I don't really want to talk about, the $30 million business. I want to talk about the $300 million business that you're going to be in 3 to 4 years, and what is required to get there to be a $300 million company. And so what I talk about, and I try to practice to get people to practice as a philosophy is, don't think about where we are in the next step that you can do, right? Don't think about that. Think about where you need to be. Where do you need to be? If you want transformations, if you want to break through, right? If you want to break through stereotypes, if you want to break through glass ceilings, if you want to break through where you are, if you want to be on an accelerated growth curve, you got to focus on where you need to be, not where you are today. Because focusing on where you are today will never get you to where you need to be. And then if that feels too far, if it feels like it's way too big to get there, then it's hard for us as a small company to say we're going to be a $1 billion company one day. Well, then what's the step before that? What's the step before that where if I can achieve that step, then the next step is pretty much a given. The next step is close enough for me to get to. And if that N-1 is still too big, is still too far, then think about an N-2 step that says, well, if I get there, then I can visualize the next 2 steps to get to where I want to go. And then keep on reversing it back to you see a place. You see a place that says, I got that. I can achieve that. And then focus on that. Right? Focus on that. Focus. It's N-2, N-3, whatever it happens to be, but focus on that. And that's how you get to where you really want to go. and that's how you break through. And that's how you sort of break out of the current day-to-day thinking of this is where I am, these are my constraints, this is the only thing I can do, I can only take this small step, right? And this allows you to take quantum steps in your life, in your career, in your projects. And so N-1 thinking is really, really important. So I'll offer that up as really the third thinking.